Everything you picture about the Middle Ages, the shining armor, the glorious castles, is probably wrong, because you're forgetting one crucial detail: the smell. The romantic image is a fantasy, and the reality was a world defined by a level of filth unimaginable to us today. So how did anyone survive it? The first thing to understand is that medieval people weren't dirty because they were lazy or stupid. They were dirty because their entire world was built on three foundational pillars that guaranteed filth. First, they had no concept of germ theory. They didn't know that microscopic organisms in waste and dirty water caused sickness. The prevailing belief was the miasma theory, the idea that disease was spread by bad air or foul smells. So while they hated bad smells, they didn't connect the underlying filth to infection. Second, there was no running water. Think about what it takes for you to take a shower. You turn a knob. For a medieval peasant, or even a noble, a hot bath was a monumental effort. Water had to be hauled by the bucket from a river or well, and every drop had to be heated over a precious fire. It was a luxury, not a routine. And third, their cities were not designed for cleanliness. There were no underground sewer systems. The street was the sewer. People would simply empty their chamber pots from a window, shouting a warning of "Gardez-vous," a corruption of the French for "watch out for the water," before the contents rained down on the street below. Living in this reality forced people to adapt in ways that are both horrifying and fascinating. Personal hygiene was a constant battle. For most people, a bath meant a quick wipe down with a damp cloth and a basin of cold water. Soap existed, but it was a harsh concoction of animal fat and lye, mostly used for laundry, not skin. And without daily washing, their bodies became ecosystems. Lice, fleas, and other pests were a simple fact of life. Fine-toothed combs, made of wood or bone, weren't just for styling hair. They were essential tools for scraping out lice and their eggs. Of course, your experience depended entirely on your station in life. A wealthy lord or lady had distinct advantages. They might have a garderobe, which was essentially a stone toilet seat in a small room that emptied directly outside the castle wall or into the moat. They owned multiple sets of linen undergarments, which was key. Linen could be washed relatively easily, and it absorbed the sweat and grime of the body, protecting the expensive outer layers of wool or velvet which were almost never washed. They could afford perfumes from the East to mask the stench that clung to everyone. Now consider a peasant. Their toilet was a communal trench or just the nearest bush. They slept on straw mattresses on the floor, which were often infested with pests. They owned maybe one or two woolen tunics that they wore day and night until they literally fell apart. Water was far too precious to be wasted on washing clothes or bodies. It was needed for cooking, drinking, and keeping their animals alive. The result was a world where everyone, from the king to the pauper, was surrounded by filth. Castle floors were covered in rushes, a type of straw, to absorb spills, grease, and discarded food. But they were rarely changed, creating a layered, rotting mat of garbage right inside the home. Living this way fundamentally shaped the medieval mind. Our modern obsession with privacy and personal space simply didn't exist. People had a shockingly high tolerance for smells we would find unbearable. Body odor wasn't an embarrassment. It was the default human state. Social norms were entirely different. It was common to spit on the floor indoors, to throw bones from your meal under the table, and to share a single drinking cup with everyone at the table. These weren't considered rude. They were just how things were done. This constant, intimate exposure to filth had a deadly consequence. It was the perfect breeding ground for disease. When the Black Death arrived in the 14th century, it spread through fleas living on rats, thriving in the unsanitary conditions of medieval cities. Their lack of hygiene wasn't just unpleasant. It was a public health catastrophe that killed nearly half the population of Europe. It's easy for us to look back and judge, but the people of the Middle Ages were simply surviving in the only world they knew, a world without the scientific knowledge or public infrastructure that we take completely for granted. So the next time you turn on a hot shower, flush a toilet, or just wash your hands with soap, take a moment. You are performing an act of everyday magic that the wealthiest medieval king could only dream of. Our entire concept of cleanliness is a fragile modern invention, built on the scientific discoveries of the last 200 years. It has doubled our lifespan, transformed our cities, and redefined what it means to be a civilized human being. The greatest luxury of the 21st century isn't your phone or your car. It's the simple, invisible shield of sanitation that separates us from the absolutely disgusting reality of our not-so-distant ancestors.